The massive chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from across the galaxy gathered for what many believed would be their final meeting. The holographic displays floating above the central platform showed the same terrifying image that had haunted their dreams for weeks. A writhing mass of darkness consuming everything in its path. Ambassador Li Jun sat quietly in the small section reserved for Earth's delegation, his simple black uniform looking plain compared to the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor worn by other species. He watched as Counselor Vex Theory, her tall crystalline body catching the light from a dozen different angles, called the emergency session to order. Fellow beings of the galaxy, her voice rang out like breaking glass. We face extinction. The entity we call the Void Swarm has consumed 7 star systems in the Outer Rim. Billions of lives gone. Entire worlds devoured. Nothing we have tried has even slowed it down. A 3-dimensional map appeared in the center of the chamber, showing the swarm's path of destruction. Red marks indicated dead systems, while a pulsing orange mass showed the creature's current position. Mathematical projections traced its route straight toward the galaxy's core worlds. General Thrak of the Krellin Empire stood first, his massive frame covered in battle scars that told stories of 1,000 victories. The warrior species had never retreated from any fight in their recorded history. My scientists have studied this enemy. It learns from every battle. It adapts to every strategy. My people have fought across the stars for 10,000 years, but this. He shook his head slowly. This is not war. This is suicide. The chamber erupted in worried murmurs. If the Krellins, whose battle songs were known throughout the galaxy, declared something impossible, what hope did anyone else have? Dr. Silvara of the Nexari Federation activated her data tablet, sending streams of information to the central display. We have run 12,000 combat simulations, she announced, her mechanical voice showing no emotion. Every scenario ends in complete defeat. The swarm analyzes our weapons, learns our tactics, and counters with perfect efficiency. Victory probability, 0.03%. The Zephyrians reached the same conclusion, added Counselor Zethran, his multiple eyes blinking in sequence. Our mathematical models show that any direct engagement would result in 99.7% casualties for the attacking force. Complete annihilation is the most likely outcome. One by one, each species delivered their verdict. The ancient Vermani, masters of space and time manipulation, declared the swarm beyond their abilities. The hegemony of worlds, with their planet-killing weapons, admitted their technology was useless against something that existed partially outside normal space. Even the mysterious ethereal collective, beings of pure energy, refused to engage. Counselor Vex Theory's crystalline form seemed to dim as each refusal was logged into the official record. The greatest civilizations in galactic history, species that had conquered death itself or bent reality to their will, were all saying the same thing. It could not be done. Perhaps, she said slowly, evacuation is our only option. We could retreat to the far spiral arms, establish new colonies beyond the swarm's reach. For how long? Demanded General Thrak. This thing will consume the entire galaxy eventually. We would only be delaying the inevitable. The debate continued for hours. Some argued for last-stand battles to buy time for evacuations. Others proposed hiding in deep space or alternate dimensions. A few suggested attempting communication with the swarm, though every previous attempt had failed. Finally, Counselor Vex Theory's gaze fell upon the human section. Li Jun had remained silent throughout the entire discussion, simply listening and taking notes on an old-fashioned paper notebook. Representative Li Jun of Earth, she said, her voice carrying a mixture of hope and pity. Your species has only been part of our alliance for 3 years. You have seen the analysis from our greatest minds. Surely you understand the wisdom of evacuation protocols. The chamber fell silent. Every eye, optical sensor, and consciousness focused on the human ambassador. Earth was barely a footnote in galactic politics, a young species that had only recently developed faster than light travel. Their military consisted of converted cargo ships and outdated weapons. Their technology was thousands of years behind the galactic standard. Li Jun closed his notebook and stood slowly. He was not tall by galactic standards, and his graying hair and weathered face showed his age. But when he spoke, his voice carried across the vast chamber with quiet authority. Honored counselors, he began, I have listened to your analysis. I understand the mathematics. I know the odds. He paused, looking around the chamber at beings who could reshape matter with their thoughts or travel between dimensions at will. But my people have a saying, the difficult we do immediately. The impossible takes a little longer. A wave of confused murmurs swept through the assembly. Several species activated their translation devices, wondering if they had misunderstood. "You cannot be serious," Dr. Silvara's mechanical voice carried a note of disbelief. "The probability calculations are absolute. No force in this galaxy can defeat the swarm." Li Jun smiled, the expression seeming out of place in the solemn chamber. "Doctor, with respect, your calculations assume logical behavior. Humans are not always logical." Counselor Vex Theory leaned forward, her crystalline body catching the light. "Are you saying that Earth will attempt what our greatest civilizations have declared impossible?" The human ambassador straightened his simple uniform and looked directly at the counselor. His next words would echo through galactic history, "We will handle it." Dr. Kim Hanna stood in the command center of the research vessel Determination, staring at the streams of data flowing across dozens of monitors. The ship hummed with activity as humans from across Earth worked together in ways that made no sense to the galaxy's greatest military minds. Outside the viewport, she could see the strangest fleet ever assembled. The human armada looked like something built from spare parts. Military destroyers flew alongside converted cargo haulers. Mining ships bristled with jury-rigged weapons. Even passenger liners had been fitted with missile pods and armor plating. Nothing matched, nothing followed standard design principles, and by every galactic regulation, none of it should work. "The swarm operates on pure logic," Kim Hanna muttered to herself, adjusting her thick glasses as another data stream appeared on her screen. "It studies enemy behavior, finds patterns, then creates perfect counters. Every species that fought it used standard military doctrine." Commander Park Miho walked over, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a tablet full of battle plans that would give any proper military strategist nightmares. "So we give it something that makes no sense," he said with a grin. "Every other civilization fought it like a chess game. We are going to fight it like humans." The strategy sessions had been unlike anything in galactic military history. Instead of computer simulations and mathematical models, humans had gathered in groups, arguing loudly, drawing diagrams on napkins, and coming up with ideas that violated every principle of space warfare. The Galactic Council observers had watched in horror as Earth's military leaders approved tactics that their computers declared impossible. "Status report on the volunteer ships," Park Miho called out to the communications station. Lieutenant Choi Yuna looked up from her console, barely containing her excitement. "The Seoul Mining Collective wants to ram their biggest hauler straight into the swarm's center while broadcasting classical music at maximum volume. They say if they are going to die, they want to do it with style." "Approved?" Park Miho nodded without hesitation. "What about the civilian modifications?" "Mechanic Hong Suk has completely rewired his mining laser to fire in random patterns. He says it will confuse anything with a brain. Engineer Yang Su has invented something she calls creative incompetence. Her weapons will deliberately malfunction in unpredictable ways." Kim Hanna turned from her monitors, pushing her glasses up her nose. "The swarm has consumed thousands of worlds by predicting enemy actions. It has never faced an opponent that makes decisions based on emotion, stubbornness, and pure human craziness. We might actually have a chance." Across the fleet, similar scenes were playing out on hundreds of ships. In the cargo hold of the converted freighter Persistence, Captain Zhang Mi watched her crew install speakers throughout the ship. They had loaded every piece of Earth music they could find, from ancient folk songs to modern rock, planning to broadcast it during battle. "Will this actually help us fight?" asked her weapons officer, Pilot Nam Jun, as he watched workers bolt a concert speaker to the hull. "Probably not," Zhang Mi admitted, "but it will definitely confuse them. Besides, if we are going to face the impossible, we might as well do it our way." On the medical ship Harmony, Dr. Lee So was training volunteers in emergency combat medicine. Most of them had never been in a fight before, but they had all volunteered when Earth put out the call for help. Among them was a retired teacher named Kim Bo, a young engineer called Park Da, and even a chef named Oh Min who had closed his restaurant to join the fleet. "Remember," Dr. Lee So told the group, "we are not following standard medical protocols. In battle, you do whatever keeps people alive even if it breaks every rule in the book. Improvise, adapt, overcome." The volunteers nodded seriously, understanding that they were preparing for something no medical textbook had ever covered. Meanwhile, in the fighter bay of the carrier Defiance, Pilot Beijing was making final adjustments to his modified interceptor. The small craft had been equipped with weapons that fired at random intervals, engines that could change direction without warning, and a sound system that could broadcast music loud enough to be heard in space. "This is insane," muttered his wingman, Lieutenant Suntae, as he watched Beijing install speakers where his backup life support should be. Exactly, Beijing replied cheerfully. The swarm expects military logic. We are giving it human logic, which means no logic at all. When they think we will go left, we go right. When they expect us to retreat, we attack. When they try to predict our behavior, we do something completely random. In the fleet's command ship, Admiral Kang Sol reviewed reports from across the armada. Every ship had reported ready, though their definition of ready would have horrified any proper military force. Weapons had been modified in ways that violated safety protocols. Tactics had been designed that ignored centuries of space warfare experience. Personnel had been assigned to jobs they had never trained for. Sir, reported Communications Officer Ryu He, we are receiving final status updates. The volunteer civilian ships are ready. The converted cargo haulers are ready. Even the passenger liner that got turned into a missile platform is ready. Admiral Kang Sol nodded, looking out at the fleet that represented humanity's greatest strength. Their absolute refusal to accept the word impossible. Send the message to all ships. Tell them to remember what we are fighting for. Not just Earth, but every world in this galaxy that still has people who dream of tomorrow. The human fleet began its final approach toward the Void Swarm, carrying with it something the galaxy had never seen before. Organized chaos guided by stubborn hope. Captain Lim Wu gripped the control handles of the converted colony ship Defiance as space around them turned completely black. The Void Swarm stretched across 3 entire star sectors, a writhing mass of darkness that seemed to eat light itself. Where stars had once shone, now only empty void remained. All ships, this is Admiral Kang Sol. The communication system crackled with static. Remember what we practiced. When they expect us to go left, we go right. When they expect strategy, we give them chaos. Make them work for every meter of space. The first wave of swarm entities emerged from the darkness like living shadows. They moved in perfect formation, their movements calculated by a hive mind that had devoured the military knowledge of 1,000 civilizations. The creatures expected to face another organized fleet using standard battle tactics. Instead, they met pilot Beijing in his heavily modified fighter, spinning wildly through space while firing his weapons in all directions. Classical Korean music blasted from speakers mounted on his hull, the sound somehow carrying through the void. His ship twisted and rolled in patterns that made no tactical sense, but somehow every random shot seemed to hit something important. "Control, this is Beijing," he called out cheerfully over the radio while his fighter performed an impossible corkscrew maneuver. "I have no idea what I am doing, but it seems to be working." On the observation deck of a distant Nexary monitoring station, alien scientists watched the battle in complete confusion. "What is that human pilot doing?" gasped Dr. Silvara, her mechanical voice showing actual emotion for the first time anyone could remember. "Winning," replied the human liaison officer Oh-min, who was calmly eating a sandwich while watching the chaos unfold. Across the battlefield, Engineer Ryuda was waist-deep in her ship's weapons control system, frantically rewiring targeting computers while explosions rocked her vessel. Sparks flew around her as she connected circuits that were never meant to touch each other. "If I do not know what I am going to do next," she grunted, dodging a falling piece of ceiling, "then neither will they." Her modifications made the ship's weapons fire at completely random intervals, sometimes shooting 3 times in 1 second, sometimes waiting 30 seconds between shots. The swarm entities kept trying to predict the pattern, but there was no pattern to predict. The swarm's hive mind, which had successfully analyzed and countered the military strategies of every species it had encountered, began to experience something it had never felt before: confusion. The human tactics made no sense. Their movements followed no logical pattern. Their decisions seemed to be based on emotion rather than strategic thinking. Mechanic Hong Suk piloted his converted mining vessel straight into a cluster of swarm entities while singing old drinking songs at the top of his lungs. His ship was not built for combat, held together with emergency welds and hope, but he drove it like a weapon. The mining lasers, modified to fire randomly, carved through the enemy formation before his vessel exploded in a brilliant flash that took 12 swarm creatures with it. "Hong Suk is down," reported Communications Officer John Era from the bridge of the Defiance, her voice tight with grief. "He knew the mission," Captain Lim Wu replied quietly, watching the explosion fade. "Mark his position. We will remember." On the medical ship Harmony, Dr. Lee So and her volunteer crew worked frantically to save wounded pilots and crew members. The retired teacher Kim Bo was helping carry stretchers, while the young engineer Park De used her technical skills to repair damaged life support systems. Even the chef Omin had found a way to help, using his kitchen knowledge to create emergency medical supplies from basic materials. "Doctor, we have incoming wounded from the cargo hauler Persistence," called out Kim Bo, no longer the quiet teacher she had been just weeks ago. "Captain Zhang Mi says they are still fighting but half their crew is injured." "Bring them in," Dr. Li so ordered. "Park Da, I need you to jury-rig more medical beds. Omin, see if you can cook up more of that painkiller substitute you invented." The battle raged across 3 dimensions as human ships fought in ways that defied every rule of space warfare. The passenger liner that had been converted into a missile platform fired its weapons while playing Earth's national anthems. A group of mining ships worked together to create a trap using modified industrial equipment, catching swarm entities in nets made from cargo cables. Lieutenant Sun Tae found himself alone in his damaged fighter, his left engine completely dead and his right engine making sounds that suggested it might explode at any moment. His weapon system was held together with emergency tape and wishful thinking, but he kept fighting. "Control, this is Sun Tae," he reported calmly while his fighter shook apart around him. "I am down to emergency power in my last missile, but I can see what looks like a command node in the swarm formation." "Negative, Sun Tae," Admiral Kang Sol's voice came through heavy static. "You are too damaged. Fall back to the medical ships." "With respect, Admiral," Sun Tae smiled as he armed his final weapon. "Humans do not fall back. We go forward even when forward looks impossible." His crippled fighter, leaking air and trailing sparks, dove straight into the heart of the swarm formation. The explosion that followed lit up the darkness like a new star, and for just a moment the advancing wall of void creatures stopped moving. Dr. Kim Hannah, monitoring the battle from her research station, watched her instruments in amazement. "The impossible," she whispered, "is becoming merely difficult." 4 hours into the battle, the bridge of the Defiance looked like it had been through a war. Emergency lights cast red shadows across cracked control panels, and Captain Lim Wu's uniform was torn and stained with blood from a dozen small cuts. The ship shuddered constantly as swarm entities tried to tear through the hull. "Damage report," she called out, gripping her command chair as another explosion rocked the vessel. Communications Officer John Era looked up from her sparking console, her face pale but determined. "We have lost the Seoul Mining Brigade, the entire cargo hauler squadron, and most of the volunteer civilian ships. Engineering reports we are down to 30% power. Weapons are barely functional." Captain Lim Wu nodded grimly. The numbers were devastating. 90% of the human fleet was gone, destroyed in the most desperate battle in galactic history. By every measure they had failed completely. But something strange was happening on the tactical display. "Captain," called out Navigator Park Seo, his voice filled with disbelief, "look at the swarm movement patterns." The holographic display showed the battlefield from above, with human ships represented by blue dots and swarm entities shown as red masses. For 4 hours, the red had been advancing steadily, consuming everything in its path. But now, for the first time since the battle began, the red was slowing down. "The swarm is hesitating," Dr. Kim Hannah reported from her research station. "Their attack patterns are becoming irregular. It is like they cannot decide what to do next." Across the battlefield, the impossible was happening. The void swarm, which had devoured entire civilizations without pause, was faltering. Its perfect coordination was breaking apart as the hive mind struggled to process something it had never encountered before. Lieutenant Nam He piloted the last operational fighter from the carrier Defiance, his left engine completely dead and his weapon system held together with emergency repairs and pure determination. His target was the massive central entity at the heart of the swarm, a creature the size of a small moon that pulsed with the absorbed consciousness of billions of dead worlds. "Control, this is Nam He broadcast on all frequencies. I can see the main target. Requesting permission to engage." "Negative, Lieutenant." Admiral Kang Sol's voice was weak but still carried authority. "Your fighter is too damaged. Fall back to the medical ships for repairs." Nam He looked at his instrument panel, where half the lights were red and the other half were not working at all. His life support had maybe 20 minutes left, his weapons had enough power for one shot, and his engines were making sounds that suggested they might explode at any moment. "With respect, Admiral," he said quietly, "humans do not fall back when someone needs help." He reached for the self-destruct controls, knowing that his small fighter carried enough explosive power to damage the swarm's central node. It would not be enough to destroy the creature, but it might create the opening that someone else could use. "Nam He, do not do this," came Captain Lim Wu's voice over the radio. "We can find another way." "Captain, there is no other way," Namhi replied, his voice calm and steady. This is what humans do. We go forward even when forward means through the impossible. On the medical ship Harmony, Dr. Lee So was treating wounded crew members when the radio chatter reached her station. Around her, volunteers who had never been soldiers before today stopped their work to listen. Kim Bo, the retired teacher, had tears in her eyes. Park Da, the young engineer, clenched her fists. Oh Min, the chef who had closed his restaurant to join the fleet, stood perfectly still. He is really going to do it? Whispered Kim Bo. That is what humans do, replied Dr. Lee So softly. When everything is impossible, we make it possible anyway. Nam Hee's fighter, trailing smoke and sparks, dove straight toward the heart of the swarm. The massive central entity, sensing danger, sent waves of smaller creatures to intercept him. But the young pilot had learned something important during the battle. Sometimes the best strategy was no strategy at all. He spun his damaged fighter in random directions, fired his remaining weapons at empty space, and played music from his personal collection at maximum volume. The swarm entities, trying to predict his movements, became confused by actions that made no tactical sense. For Earth, Nam He said quietly, arming the self-destruct. For everyone who still believes in tomorrow. The explosion that followed was not just physical. It was conceptual, a burst of pure human determination that hit the swarm's hive mind like a hammer blow. The creature had absorbed the knowledge of thousands of species, but it had never encountered anything like human stubbornness made manifest. The central entity convulsed, its perfect unity cracking. Across the battlefield, individual swarm creatures began acting independently for the first time in their existence, no longer guided by the collective intelligence that had made them unstoppable. Captain Lim Wu watched the tactical display as red dots began flickering and disappearing. All ships, she broadcast to the surviving human vessels, the swarm is breaking apart. Press the attack. The handful of remaining human ships, battered and barely functional, charged forward into the gap that Nam He had created with his sacrifice. They were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, but they carried something the swarm could not understand or counter: the absolute refusal to give up when others were counting on them. In the darkness of space, impossibility met human determination, and for the first time in galactic history, impossibility blinked first. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been running for 8 straight hours when the first transmission arrived. Council members from across the galaxy sat in stunned silence, watching empty holographic displays that had shown nothing but static for the past 6 hours. No one expected any survivors. Councillor Vex Theory's crystalline form had dimmed with exhaustion and grief. The assembled representatives had spent hours debating evacuation plans and discussing which star systems might be far enough away to escape the swarm's inevitable advance. Some species had already begun loading their most important citizens onto transport ships. Then the communication system crackled to life. Galactic Council, this is Admiral Kang Sol of the Earth Defense Fleet. The voice was tired and rough but unmistakably human. We are transmitting from the edge of Sector 7. Every being in the chamber turned toward the central display as it flickered and resolved into a grainy image. Admiral Kang Sol appeared on screen, his uniform torn and his face bearing fresh scars. Behind him, the bridge of his command ship showed damage from the fiercest battle in galactic history. Status report, Admiral, Councillor Vex Theory managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. The void swarm has been stopped, Admiral Kang Sol replied simply. It will not be consuming any more worlds. The silence that followed was so complete that the chamber's life support system seemed loud by comparison. General Thrak of the Krellin Empire was the first to find his voice. Impossible, he growled. Our calculations showed complete annihilation for any attacking force. Your calculations were correct, Admiral Kang Sol agreed, his tired eyes looking directly at the Krellin general. We lost 97% of our fleet. Our tactics made no military sense. Our weapons were inferior to yours in every way. Dr. Silvara of the Nexari Federation activated her analysis programs, running the data through 12 different computer models. Then how did you succeed where our greatest civilizations failed? Because we never accepted that failure was an option, the Admiral replied. The swarm was designed to fight logical opponents who followed military doctrine. We fought it with something it had never encountered: pure human stubbornness. On the screen behind Admiral Kang Sol, other humans moved through the damaged bridge. Captain Lim Wu was there, her arm in a makeshift sling but still giving orders to repair crews. Dr. Kim Hanna sat at a console recording data about the battle. Communications Officer John Era worked at a station held together with emergency tape and determination. We studied every battle the swarm had fought, Admiral Kong Sol continued. Every species tried to match it with superior technology or perfect strategy. We realized that was exactly what it expected. So we gave it chaos instead. We made decisions based on emotion rather than logic. We did things that made no tactical sense but felt right in our hearts. Counselor Zethran's multiple eyes blinked in sequence as he processed this information. You defeated an entity that had consumed billions of lives through the power of emotional decision-making? Not just that, came another voice from off-screen. Ambassador Li Jun stepped into view, his simple black uniform now bearing the scorch marks of battle. We defeated it because we refused to believe that some people were acceptable losses. Every other species calculated the cost and decided it was too high. We decided that the cost of not trying was higher. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs as representatives tried to understand what they were hearing. How could a species that had joined the galactic community just 3 years ago succeed where ancient civilizations had failed? Show them, Admiral Kong Sol said quietly to someone off-screen. The display changed to show the aftermath of the battle. Where the void swarm had been, space was now clear except for the wreckage of human ships and the strange crystalline structures that remained when swarm entities died. At the center of it all, a memorial beacon transmitted the names of the fallen. Lieutenant Nam He, age 24, died breaking the swarm's central coordination, Admiral Kong Sol's voice narrated over the images. Mechanic Hong Suk, age 37, died taking 12 entities with his mining ship. Captain Zhang Mi, age 41, died defending a medical transport. They all died doing something your computers said was impossible. Dr. Li So appeared on screen next, her medical uniform stained but her eyes bright with determination. Behind her, volunteers who had been teachers and engineers and chefs just days before worked alongside trained medical staff to care for the wounded. We did not win because we were stronger, Dr. Li So said. We won because we cared more about protecting others than protecting ourselves. When the swarm tried to predict our behavior, we did things that made no sense except to hearts that refused to give up. Counselor Vex Theory leaned forward, her crystalline voice filled with wonder. How do we classify this in our military databases? How do we explain what happened here? Ambassador Li Jun smiled, the same quiet expression he had worn when volunteering for the impossible mission. Simple. When dealing with problems that cannot be solved, ask the humans. We specialize in making the impossible merely improbable. The transmission ended, leaving the Galactic Council in stunned silence. Across the galaxy, species that had ruled star systems for millennia quietly updated their databases with a new entry: human military doctrine. When logic fails, try hope. When strategy fails, try heart. When everyone says no, humans say we will. And in a small cafe on Earth, an old veteran named Ko Jun raised his coffee cup in a toast to the empty chairs around him, chairs forever reserved for friends who had proven that impossible was just another word for something humans had not tried yet.